In all nature, there is no law more fundamental than the second law of thermodynamics. The most fatal objection to the theory of evolution is that it goes against the second law of thermodynamics. This law is so fundamental that it is basic to modern science. Nothing has ever been observed to break this law. It can be stated in many ways. For our purpose, it means A, natural processes always tend towards disorder. That is, they move from orderliness to disorderliness. And B, the simple will never produce the more complex. It means that the universe is running down, that all natural order is going downhill into disorder. But evolution requires the opposite. It requires the universe to run uphill, order to arise out of disorder. Evolution requires the simple to produce the more complex. It requires jellyfish to become men. Evolution defies the second law of thermodynamics. And the only justification offered is that energy from the sun could do the trick. But energy alone will not produce order from disorder. A bull in a china shop produces energy, but it doesn't produce order. Likewise, the sun's energy is useless for sustaining the complexity of life without the God-given mysterious photosynthesis of plants and the God-given mysterious DNA in the living cell. Darwin knew about this second law of thermodynamics, but he broke it. He proposed that the simple would produce the more complex. We all know that offspring resemble their parents, but also vary from their parents in small ways. Darwin seized on these variations. He said that occasionally a chance variation in an individual creature would give that individual an advantage. Then, by natural selection, that individual would probably survive the others and would pass on its favorable variation to its offspring in turn. Thus, the small favorable variation would be handed on and on over countless generations, getting better and more complex, and would finally produce a superior creature, a new species. So Darwin broke the fundamental law of thermodynamics, and he got away with it. He got away with it because evolution is the only alternative to supernatural creation. And Darwin pleased the generation that was seeking escape from God. And Darwinism has continued to please the 19th and the 20th centuries, riding the tide that is running from God. The fatal error in Darwinism is easy to pinpoint. Darwin noted variation within species. He saw varieties of finches, varieties of lizards, varieties of turtles, and then he went wrong. He imagined that these variations must continue beyond the species, jumping across barriers of genera and families, so that he imagined a jellyfish could vary on into a lizard, and on into a monkey, and on into a man. Now, this monstrous imaginativeness was soon accepted and was dressed up as science. And ever since, for over a century, science has been trying to dig up some evidence to support the imagining, and so far it has failed to produce any real evidence for the dream. Modern science tells us that every creature has a set of genes, G-E-N-E-S. It gets half a set from each parent. The combinations of the genes is what causes the variations of individuals within the species. The genes of a butterfly or an ape or a fowl carry the code which determines the appearance and the character of the butterfly or the ape or the fowl. And the code allows great variety within the species or the kind. But not even a mutation of a gene will break through the barrier of the species or the kind. A mutation is when a gene goes slightly haywire and an offspring is produced with a marked difference, an abnormality which becomes inheritable. A mutation has become a magic word. Against all the evidence, mutations are supposed to produce the changes that drive the wheels of evolution. And then the next step is that science says that mutations would happen in groups, not in one individual here and another individual there, but that the wave of mutations would hit whole groups and colonies, mutating them as colonies up the ladder of evolution. Then, behold, when the time was ripe, groups of non-human animals would have given birth to groups of hairy first men and hairy first women, instead of one noble first man, Adam, and one splendid Eve. There would have been colonies of hairy first men and women everywhere, popping out of non-human mothers in a wave of mutations. You picture multitudes of these Adams, multitudes of repulsive Eves, sharing the same fields and trees with their beast parents. And that is polygenism, which is being taught as the modern world view. That is polygenism, which Pope Pius XII ruled against. Polygenism, which Cardinal Ottaviani called the worst error in the Church today. Mutations, you'll be told, can do it all, but the evidence says no. The evidence clearly proves that mutations for practical purposes are always useless or harmful. They're often fatal. They cause diabetes, club feet, hemophilia, Mongolism, color blindness, sickle cell anemia, and such tragic afflictions. Now here is a dramatic example of a mutation, a bull with 5 legs. If this is a true mutation, it becomes inheritable. But a bull like this would be badly adapted to survival and would probably disappear within a generation. However, note that this is a bull with an extra bull's leg. It's not the start of an elephant's trunk or a cat's whisker. Like evolution, it's still all bull. Now, here is the point. A mutation can alter an organ, can deform an organ, can misplace an organ. But it always remains an organ of the species concerned. It is never the start of a new organ of a different species. So, can mutations do it? They cannot. And this was demonstrated by long years of experiments on the fruit fly. And these are some fruit flies from the experiments. They show one result of mutation. Their wings are stunted. They're defective wings, but they're still fruit fly wings. The stunted wings were transmitted to the next generation, which shows that this was a true mutation. Fruit flies breed rapidly, and that makes them good subjects for experiments. Furthermore, the fruit flies were given doses of radiation, which speeded their mutation rate by 15,000%. But after long experimentation, and after 1,000 generations and 25 million fruit flies later, it was clear that the fruit fly refused to turn into anything else. Certainly there was variation, plenty of variation, in bodies, in wings, in eyes, in feet, in bristles. There was grotesqueness, there were freaks. Perhaps the strangest of all was the fruit fly with a foot coming from its mouth. But it was a fruit fly foot. It wasn't a bull's foot. And another interesting thing, no matter how monstrous the offspring, it was able to breed with the parent stock, if it was capable of breeding at all. And that, of course, means that it was still the same fruit fly species. Throughout it all, from first to last, the fruit fly remained a fruit fly. I suppose you've heard the story that the human embryo has gill slits like a fish and a tail like an animal. Well, this is still being used as a propaganda trick like this from the Courier Mail. And in case you can't read it, it says, after a million years, man is still evolving while still retaining traces of his animal ancestors, including fine hair on the skin and, in the embryo stage, a tail and gill slits like a fish. Darwin had an ally, Ernst Haeckel, who propounded this theory of recapitulation, which said that the embryo reenacts the history of its evolution. Haeckel falsified drawings and he faked photographs to give the evidence a nudge for his law. And this supposed law dominated biology for many years. But now, science has thrown it out. It's discredited. It's exploded. It's been out for 40 years. And that is the short, crushing answer to this dishonest propaganda. First, those gill slits. In the first photo, you see them near the head of this human embryo. And the fact is they are not slits at all. They are the visceral arches, and they carry blood vessels, ordinary blood vessels, which take blood to the head and the back. when you were an embryo, if you had ever developed a slit like the Courier Mail claims, you wouldn't be sitting here tonight. You'd have entered the world as a fish and nothing but a fish. Next, the business about a tail. To put it as simply as possible, in the embryo, the budding legs need plenty of blood, and they wouldn't get enough blood if they were right at the end of the embryo body. In the second photo, you see the leg buds at a point a little distance from the end of the notochord, which becomes the backbone. So the evolutionists point to the part of the notochord extending past the leg buds and call it a tail, even though science threw this out 40 years ago. The growing body absorbs the supposed tail except the last 4 vertebrae, and they fuse into the coccyx bone. On this happy skeleton, you see it near the lady's hand. The evolutionists will now call the coccyx a vestigial tail, that is a useless leftover from our animal ancestors. But the coccyx is anything but useless. Without the coccyx, you could not sit down comfortably. And it's been said that nature never invented anything more wonderful than sitting down. And every long-winded lecturer is thankful that audiences have coccyxes. But there's more to the coccyx than comfortable sitting down. The coccyx bone has a vital job. It's an anchor post. Ligaments and muscles are anchored to it. Muscles which control the anus. The coccyx is important in the body's elimination mechanism. Don't let anybody kid you that it's a tail on its last legs. It used to be popular to point to vestigial organs as evidence for evolution. The coccyx, of course, and body hairs, and the appendix. There was a long list, about 180 of these useless leftovers. Man was a walking museum of the good old animal days. But as medical knowledge advanced, nearly every one has been found to be functional, even vital. The list of 180 has been reduced to about a half a dozen to date. Take the thymus gland. It was called a useless vestigial organ. Then science discovered that the thymus is the master gland, protecting the body against infection. Despite all this, vestigial organs are still slipped in as evidence for evolution, and that's evidence that they're short of evidence. We now move on to the fossil record. Evolution must stand or fall on the fossil record. If living things evolve step by step, there should be plenty of fossils of intermediate creatures, the halfway creatures, halfway between one species and the next. But where are these half and half creatures? Our artists invented these for the fun of it. But really, these nightmares are no more impossible than the halfway something between a land animal and a whale, or the halfway something between a reptile and a bird. The half and half things, the neither one things nor the other thing creatures. There should be many more fossils of them than fossils of the perfected species, but there is not one. No fossil has been found of any intermediate experimental creature. What the fossil record does show is this: perfected kinds and unbridgeable gaps separating the kinds. Really, the fossil record is beautiful evidence for the Bible. Creatures created according to their kinds. Next, we'll look at the geologic time spans, the multi-million year time spans, and later on we'll challenge them. We'll endeavour to show that they're frauds. But for the moment, let's pretend they existed while we look at the fossil record. According to the fossils in the rocks, life began suddenly in the Cambrian period, about 500 million years ago. The rocks older than the Cambrian show no signs of life, nothing except some vague markings which evolutionists claim are signs of Precambrian life. But they're controversial, they're extremely few, whereas there should be an immense fossil record of earlier life, evolving for 1,000 million years before that Cambrian explosion of life. Evolution depends on a great Precambrian fossil record, and it just cannot be found, except for those few vague and disputed markings. Except for them, The Precambrian rocks are barren and lifeless. But in the Cambrian rocks immediately above them, the fossils appear suddenly. Suddenly there's teeming life. And these are highly specialized creatures, sharply divided into species, genera, families, and so on. The first fossils are quite disastrous for the theory of evolution. Even Darwin admitted that this could be an objection to his theory. And another scientist declared the rocks cry out creation. After the Cambrian period, new groups and kinds appear in the rocks from time to time. But every time a new kind appears, even creatures like that long-necked one, the most incredible fossil ever found, whenever a new kind appears in the rocks, it appears suddenly, fully perfect, and with no link to any previous kind. There are no fossils of transitional creatures. Dinosaurs are the artist's symbol of evolution, but dinosaurs contradict evolution. The great dinosaurs appeared from nowhere. They had their period, then they disappeared mysteriously, and that is not evolution. Tyrannosaurus rex was the king, 50 feet long, 20 feet high, with great 6-inch teeth. Diplodocus, on the left, was 90 feet long. You'd need 3 semi-trailers to spread him out. His feet supported 30 tons. On the top right is Brachiosaurus. He was tremendous. Even if you climbed a tree 40 feet high, Brachiosaurus could have lifted his head up and looked you in the eye at 40 feet. Well, his feet carried 50 tons. The dinosaurs were colossal, and they left colossal fossils. But there are no colossal fossils of something evolving into a dinosaur. And then there's a worse problem, the pterodactyls. Well, these were reptiles, but there is an infinite gulf between them and any other reptile. These were the flying reptiles, with great leathery wings. They came in various sizes, the smallest no bigger than a sparrow, while the big one at the top of our picture had a wingspan of 25 feet. They have no ancestors. The first specimen was a perfect pterodactyl. And these are such a problem that one evolution book itself admits, I quote, "All in all, we should have had many fewer problems if the pterodactyls had never existed," unquote. So you see, we find among the dead fossils no links and no evolution. And if we turn to living creatures, again we will find no evolution. Living creatures prove that species do not change, no matter how long the supposed time span. For example, and still supposing these millions of years, there's a dragonfly species still with us after 60 million years. The Australian lungfish, which should have evolution in its blood, it hasn't changed in 220 million years. Spiders, unchanged in 300 million years. Cockroaches and silverfish, no change in 350 million years. We can point to the turtles. They've been turtles for 250 million years. Now, they have an incredible skeleton. They live inside boxes. Their limb girdles are inside the rib cage. And that should mean a lot of evolving. We should find millions of quarter turtles, then half turtles, and so on. But we don't. The very first turtles were perfect turtles. There's not one fossil of something pre-turtle, nearly turtle. One final example. The famous coelacanth fish, old Four-Legs himself. This fish was recorded as having become extinct 70 million years ago. But in 1938, a fisherman hauled up a coelacanth alive and kicking. And this to the evolutionist was just as upsetting as if a dinosaur had walked up the street. Well, since then, more coelacanths have been caught alive, exactly as they were when the last coelacanth fossil was laid down 70 million years ago. And when I tell you that a branch of the family is supposed to have turned into the amphibians, you'll know that coelacanth should have evolution in his blood, but he's defied evolution for 70 million years. To sum up, living creatures are living evidence against evolution, while extinct creatures present a record of unbridgeable gaps. and the gaps in the fossil record worried Professor Goldsmith, who was an eminent geneticist and a complete evolutionist. He finally admitted that the fossil record proved that evolution could not have happened by slow and gradual change. But rather than give evolution away, he said it must have happened by big jumps. So Goldsmith proposed his theory, the theory of the hopeful monster. He proposed that every now and again, a creature must have produced an offspring totally different from its parents, that is, a monster. For example, a reptile must have laid an egg, and out of the egg must have hatched a bird. What do you think? It has been said that the professor laid the egg. But this is sure. The fossil record has become fatal to the theory of evolution. But the fossil record confirms the Bible, creatures created according to their kind. Now the horse. They always trot out the horse, the prize exhibit, the horse series. The pedigree you're looking at is very simplified. There are others more complex. In fact, Douglas Dewar stated that he had seen 20 pedigrees of the horse, and every one different. But whatever the pedigree, and whether simple or complex, we can attack it at the bottom with Eohippus, or at the top with Equus, or anywhere in the middle, because of a mortal weakness. There is no evidence of relationship, no connection of one specimen, of one link with the next. Each link in the horse series is isolated. These are extinct mammals found in different parts of the world, and they're quite likely of different species and genera. Down at the bottom is little Eohippus, about the size of a fox, with several toes on each foot. Eohippus, the dawn horse. But was Eohippus a horse at all? On the evidence, no. Several evolutionists, including the eminent Professor Gaylord Simpson, have admitted that Eohippus could just as easily be regarded as the ancestor of other kinds of animals, like the tapir or the rhinoceros, instead of the ancestor of the horse. The horse theories can also be attacked on the dating of the specimens. In fact, Dr. Kirkett of Southampton University, himself an evolutionist, has openly questioned the dating. And if the dating is wrong, well, the whole horse series is worthless. The same Dr. Kirkett has also warned us that the textbook pictures of the horse family are imaginative, artist's imagination. Dr. Kirkett says the pictures rely on faith rather than evidence. Faith rather than evidence. Nobody knows where Equus came from. Equus has given different ancestors by different authorities, and that shows that his ancestry is unknown. And of course it is unknown. And here's the final blow. Fossils of the modern Equus have now been found dating back to the same time as Eohippus, our dawn horse. Equus and Eohippus living at the same time. Need I say more? Reptile into bird. Nobody can say even which order of reptiles did this trick. It's simply an article of faith. Not only would the whole skeleton have to be transformed, there would also have to be a completely different nervous system, digestive system, eliminatory system, a radically different muscular system with flying muscles, also feet turning into wings, and scales turning into wonderful feathers. As an evolutionist, you don't ask for evidence for all this, because there is no evidence, but you accept it on pure faith. And evolutionist faith leaves religious faith for dead. But you'll say, what about Archaeopteryx? Isn't Archaeopteryx a link between bird and reptile? Well, I've time only to touch on this argument. Agreed, Archaeopteryx had teeth, but all birds of the Cretaceous period had teeth. Agreed that he had a long jointed tail, a peculiar tail, but it proves nothing. Agreed he had small claws on his wingtips, but there are two modern birds with claws on wingtips. And now, in the things that matter, and I've time only to touch on three. Firstly, reptiles are cold-blooded, birds are warm-blooded. Archaeopteryx was fully warm-blooded. Secondly, Sir Gavin de Beer has listed the published papers of scientists on Archaeopteryx. 6 call him lizard, 8 say intermediate, 37 classify him as a bird. Thirdly, and I think this is conclusive, Archaeopteryx had feathers. The fossil imprint showed the clear imprint of feathers, which you may be able to see in this picture. Things like horns and hooves and hair happen often, but feathers happen once only, and only to birds. Only birds have feathers, and Archaeopteryx had perfect feathers, and he could fly. Feathers are evolution's worst stumbling block. Feathers are miracles of natural engineering. You see a shaft with dozens of barbs coming from it at a slant. Under a microscope, you see hundreds of thousands of little barbules. Then on these are millions of tiny barber cells. And then on many of the barber cells are the tiniest hooks, which in flight interlock the whole structure into a plane of wonderful firmness and elasticity and lightness. Then in an instant, the whole thing can be suddenly unlocked to let the air pass through. So, how did a reptile get wonderful feathers? Some claim that reptile scales mutated into feathers, but on good authority, that would not be a mutation, that would be a miracle. Some will claim that friction of air did it. Friction of air on the scales of generations of reptiles as they jumped from tree to ground, or reptiles like this who ran along the ground waving their forelimbs in the wind. Friction of air over vast time, fraying scales into wonderful feathers. What do you think? Douglas Dewar, fellow of the Zoological Society, said, "If this is serious science, so is the story of Cinderella."
That was the end of Section 1, which dealt with the general arguments against the theory of evolution. The lecture is divided into 4 sections. The speaker now proceeds with Section 2, which looks at the supposed ape men, or hominids.